stars be with you.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Energetic Principles podcast. We are back for episode number 2 in our loosely involving Saturn Neptune conjunction series for the fall of 2025. And today I have a new guest on the podcast, Tasha Beg. Thanks for joining me, Tasha.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
I am very excited to have you on the program today because we're going to be talking about something that I know a little bit about in the past, not so much about in the current, but pop culture and how it meets Saturn in Aries, right? Saturn in Aries, Saturn, we think about Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn together is always creating some sort of structure of how, social life unfolds in these 20-year cycles. But
Mhm.
Saturn in a sign is a big deal. And so Tasha is known as the pop astrologist. And so
Yeah.
what better person to come on and talk about pop culture and relating to Saturn Aries, what we've seen so far, because we've only got a
Mhm.
little bit of a preview, right? We still got, a couple years left of this. Even though it's in Pisces now, it won't be there for long. And so we want to know what to look forward to when Saturn moves back in, and maybe some threads throughout history that might tie in what Saturn and Aries might have in store. But before we get started with all that, Tasha, tell the people who you are.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm Tasha. I'm known as at the Pop Astrologist on all social media platforms. And my mission, I guess, unofficially, is to reclaim pop culture for the good. Meaning, it's not necessarily intended as a celebratory or celebrity idolization type of an account, but rather as an astrologer, as astrologers, I think we all have gone through the motions of, oh, let's study this person so that we can get a better understanding of the placements, the chart, the myth. And I think that pop culture is such an amazing educational resource as such. But, when you actually get a chance to stop and think, you're thinking, okay, what is this actually really saying about where the people's minds are? What is this really saying or reflecting back to us about this time period? Because as we know, history and history books are always, written by the victors. And I think Joseph Campbell said this, you can't really trust history necessarily. You can trust myth, however, because there's always an interesting retelling of it. So, this is my version of trying to keep track and commemorate everything that's happening in such crazy times that we're in. And especially since Pluto just even moved out of bounds recently. So you definitely do see that coming up also in pop culture, I would imagine.
Yes, pop culture is our mirror to some extent, right?
Hmm.
And we look to it. I mean, a lot of people look to it to lead their own lives. I mean, that has been a theme for decades upon decades now, ever since pop culture. It's funny when you think about pop culture, it makes me think of Christopher Renstrom, actually. I don't know if you're familiar with Christopher and his work. He was a guest many moons ago on this podcast, but I remember we talked about trash astrology. That was the name. That was the name of the program. But really it was talking more about like sun sign astrology, and essentially
Hmm.
that it was a form of pop culture, and he loves pop culture. And so I'm just thinking about pop culture and when does that start? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, in the 20th century. But
Hmm.
I'm sure pop culture has been around or some version of it since the beginning of time, of
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you can think about maybe the royals, as sort of the original like celebrities, right? And of course, we still are under, I guess, a monarchy in certain parts of the world, or, if Trump would want us to believe we are under a monarchy. But the reality is, celebrity, aspirational figureheads, things of that nature, that's just perpetual. It's just give it a different name. I just finished writing something on Marie Antoinette as, kind of like an original celebrity and comparing her to sort of the fate that some celebrities are experiencing right now in the public eye, sort of a public beheading, if you will,
the
at this
public.
junction.
Yes. Yes. Off with their heads, which is very Pluto and Aquarius out of bounds, I suppose. Also.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. I mean, I don't know if you know this. I don't know it, but it's coming to mind right now of why pop? Why
Hmm.
pop culture? Do you know anything about like the etymology of pop or why it's attached to that? And if you don't, that's fine. I'm just wondering myself.
Honestly, I never looked into it, but I would just imagine that, pop and popular and the idea that this is really built around a water cooler conversation. So you could have something to talk about at the office at literally the water cooler. And so I do think that, HBO or television, in maybe the late when Saturn was in Pisces in like the 1990s onwards, you really start to see like I think a different kind of proliferation. Technology has obviously made data so much more easy to attain. And so everyone's more clued in. And so there are more things to talk about. And, from a personal perspective, that's why I think I was always so fascinated by pop culture because from my roots, I'm half Malaysian, half Pakistani, and I've never fit in anywhere fundamentally, even back in Malaysia as a mixed race kid. And so the easiest thing that I could learn to communicate because it's kind of like a language is pop culture. And so I'm communicating and connecting with people. We all have a favorite celebrity. Even if we don't like all the celebrities, we have a favorite musician and we can talk about that art. It's really a bridge
Mm,
at connecting. And so for me, I mean, I learned how to speak a different language watching Hong Kong TVB dramas growing up as a kid. So to me, pop culture is actually such an under appreciated resource, free resource that we all have and share. And it really actually does connect people. And so, again, I feel like I'm feeding people vegetables with their pop culture by layering in, the astro analysis, by
mm,
layering in sort of more socio, I guess, politically aware commentary.
mm.
But it's all part of popular culture. It's really what you make of it. It doesn't have to just mean one specific thing, in my definition, at the very least.
How interesting. You're definitely onto something there with the fact that it's a bridge, it's a connector. And even if you're not in pop culture, like I was telling Tasha before we got on here, I was like, I'm not really a pop culture person. I've always been the underground. Like I want to live
Mhm.
below pop culture. I don't want to have anything to do with pop culture, so to speak.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, culture is culture, and culture is what connects us. And it doesn't matter if you're part of the pop and the mainstream or if you're more of the underground person that's looking for, you know, that's something that's not out in the open that everybody knows about. You know, it is that culture is all about our point of connection and feeling, tied into someone or something or an expression or a visual. And it makes me wonder if there was no pop culture, what would
Mhm.
people talk about?
May I mean, maybe more important things sometimes, but you will see a lot more of that proliferation with Saturn and Aries, right? The expectation of being a celebrity comes with responsibilities, and part of that responsibility is how you direct your audience to pay attention to some important things happening in the world
Yes.
right now. And you see the public fatigue at celebrities who don't necessarily use their platform such. So I think that's a really interesting thing we're seeing from Saturn and Pisces in a Saturn in Aries. There's the responsibility around activism and how you effectively lead when you have such an impressive platform. Like, what do you really do with your power?
Oh, I love that. Yes. Put a pin in that for later because that is going to be an interesting talking point.
Mhm.
So let us talk a little bit about Saturn and Aries, reflected in the collective and just a little refresher of when Saturn was in Aries in at least the 20th century. We've got 1937 to 1939, 1967 to 1969, and then 1996 to early 1999. So they're they really line up. Saturn likes its roughly 29-30 year period, and
It's consistent.
it's very consistent. You got to love Saturn for that. And so I was going back and looking at a lot of the different themes in pop culture that were reflected during these periods, and things keep coming up, and we're going to talk about some of those here today, and in relation to what's going on now. But hold those dates in so you can get a little reference mark for what we talk about here. But just that Saturn and Aries as an archetype, if you how would you describe Saturn and Aries in your mind?
The first image that really comes to mind is a messy hero. It's the idea that there's a kid in the room who's got all these really amazing superpowers, has no idea what to do with it. But there's a lot of intention, there's a lot of heart, there's a lot of passion, but there is a need to ultimately lead from that place and become the authority in the room. And so I think, yeah, a messy hero is really what I think of. I also think, of course, Saturn is fallen in Aries, if you are a traditional astrologer and you think about planetary condition. And so you also then think about, well, man children. That's a that's an image that comes to mind also. But maybe the overall idea of children in the room pretending to be the adults.
Mm. Yeah, that can definitely be the thing too, for sure.
Across, and you know what? This is not just man children, it's across both. The
Yeah,
idea that we're operating from a more defensive place rather than maybe a more, let's really consider all things here. So, selfishness does come to mind, of course, but the idea of sometimes selfishness is necessary as a leader to make decisions on behalf of people for the greater good. But then, of course, selfishness can be very much against the public as well. So, yeah, messiness, Saturn and Aries, to me, they're very interlinked.
that is very true. I mean, it's just because something's in fall, it doesn't, fall is not necessarily a bad thing. It
Hmm.
can be, and it might not be. But either
Hmm.
way, it still has that effect on authority or systems or structure that might be charging a different path or taking a risk or stepping out and seeing the messy superhero or the person that speaks up and grabs their power, but it could destroy their what they've built, or
Hmm.
because there is this sense of what the confines are, the boundaries of the placement of life. In Aries, if you're going to venture out and be bold and do something different, it can erode or dissipate what exists. And that could be great, when we think about just
Hmm.
new beginnings and new frontiers and how do we build a new box to then be contained by in pop culture, like these are the turning points for. And I was noticing going back in some of the research that there are significant innovations that create structures that will become the norm over time
Hmm.
during this period, but the
Hmm.
old structure has to fall away in what people are know and are used to,
Hmm.
and even like down to simple things like formats, like for example, in the late 30s, that's when Technicolor came on the scene and
Mm.
inched out the black and white films, and it was all about color. That was the way to go. And then same in actually the late 60s, that's when the color TV took over and the black and white TV was replaced.
Hmm.
And in the late 90s, that's when DVDs came in and then VHS was replaced. So even if you think about the simplicity of format and how we receive the things that are our pop culture,
Hmm.
like to go a new direction, we have to say goodbye to the old, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you for bringing up that film connection because something that I wanted to talk about or at least highlight, obviously Hollywood is going through right now its own type of forging a fire or forging a new identity in the context of AI and, Pluto and Aquarius. And this week, actually, of us talking, I think the first AI actress has been signed or finally has an agent or something. Tilly Norwood. Yes. And it's insane. She looks so lifelike. It's scary, honestly. But when you think about the next frontier, obviously we're going to have to talk about AI as part of that. But what does that really mean? It's original. And actually, originality is something big that studios are banking on. This year, Warner Brothers, I believe, had its most successful year. I think the first all seven movies it's released thus far has hit, box office success, like number one. And in terms of original content, they had Sinners out this year, they had Weapons. And so when you think about the hunger's demand for something new, we don't want
Mm.
a sequel. We don't want another superhero sequel type of Marvel universe build out. We want actual, like, true content that comes from people and different experiences. Obviously DEI and representation is becoming a little more more fraught in the industry these days. But I still say that film is also a really beautiful place for resistance in that way. So you do see some Saturn and Aries type of figures also emerge in film as such. So yeah, it's a really interesting time of new frontiers. Absolutely.
Tilly Norwood, is that where is that
Tilly Norwood, the
Tilly
AI.
Norwood? That sounds so um I mean, that sounds so old Hollywood, to be honest. Like the name itself
Yeah.
is it's almost like trying to go into the future by hearkening back to a golden age. Like it sounds like
Almost like
the
Make America Great
great
Again.
again. Oh yeah, heard that one before. Um, yeah, that's so interesting to me because I can see like a Hitchcock film, featuring Tilly
Yes.
Norwood. Um,
Totally,
yeah,
totally.
that's wild. I will need to wrap my head around that a little bit, but
But
so
I mean,
well,
it's not only just film though, it is music. There's the first R&B artist just got signed by I forget what label. And again, people are like, well, where do you want your content to come from? It has to come from the soul. It can't come from technology that doesn't understand human experience. So,
mm, you know what that makes me think of though, is that have we become so carbon copy and cookie cutter that we will accept these
hmm
forms of film or these forms of music? How do we get back to the soul of what humans offer to creativity and to the culture itself? Because I think
hmm
the reason why these can slip in and find its place is because we have acquiesced some of our creativity to very Saturn, right? To the forms
hmm
that, work. I was watching the show The Studio, and they always make the
hmm
joke on that about, you know, oh yeah, we're up to for something new, but yeah, but we have a strict formula that has worked for us,
Right.
so we're going to stick within that. So it makes me wonder if it's these things coming to the forefront is the push that's needed to return us to our soul and remember what gifts we
hmm
have as humans and creators.
Well, to be fair, I'm not here to be very clear, I am on the team of I don't like to use AI when I'm creating my original content. I know some people that's the first place they go to, but for me, I have to at least get some things down on paper first. I just want to make that very clear before I make this next comment and play devil's advocate. Um, Realistically, these AI people aren't also, they're not coming out of nowhere. There are real people creating them. So there's almost a different type of relationship with creation where
Mm,
you're not necessarily the center. It's like you're creating the Sims. You're creating a sim to then go play in real life. And so it kind of takes the relationship out of direct creation, or at least it morphs it a little bit because there's still creation happening. It's just under a different guise of
yeah,
creation,
no,
I think.
that makes total sense. And I will give you that point because it is true. I mean, I use certain things in my own music production that are AI based, not AI like creating the music. But
Mm,
maybe I recorded a particular passage that is live and then I have AI, jam it up into something different. And then I cut it
hmm
and then throw it into this, that, whatever. So there is definitely a definition of how we can use these tools and rework
hmm
them with our own creativity and, maybe be more efficient or maybe just create new things faster because we have just different tools to work with. But there are
hmm
also those straight up like get in there, throw in your idea. I want a 60s, soul ballad in the style of blah blah blah, and these are
hmm
this is the lyric or this is the center, and it'll spit you out a song right away.
hmm
And so I think it's good to because a lot of us, and maybe even including myself in this moment, can throw it all in, like all that. It's just bad to go that direction. But with everything in
hmm
life, there's gray area and there's discrepancy. And I think
hmm
um, I'll be interested to see some of these themes that you said are coming up, like Tilly Norwood, and then how it's put in to play. Um,
hmm
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And you know what's interesting? You brought up this just triggered another thought, but Canva, right?
mm,
It really came into popularity over the last couple of years, really, if you want to think about it. And my partner and I talk about this all the time. What does this do really for creativity? Because if you're a graphic designer, if you're an illustrator, if you are someone that, your design is basically getting carbon copied, and now everyone has a template, right? Like, so there has been, as you said, an erosion of creativity. So when you think about what we were saying earlier with Saturn and Pisces into Aries, like some things do have to be eroded, but maybe it means it's a different approach to creativity, and we need to now figure out what that looks like as well.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, especially when we all got to pump out content 24/7. You got to get it out there.
Mm.
You don't have the time to like work on that concept piece that, when you start from scratch, for most people, even if you're a pro at what it is you do, a lot of times it can take a lot of time, it's
Absolutely.
true. So, yeah. I want to come back to what you were talking about earlier, when we got into Tilly a little bit about this the superhero archetype, because that's one of the
Yes.
things that you brought to my attention was Superman coming to the fray here in July.
Hmm.
A new Superman movie was released, and funny enough, or not funny enough, Superman first came on the scene during Saturn and Aries period in 1938, which,
Hmm.
fun fact, he was supposed to be a scientific villain. They entertained him doing
Yes.
us. And I was like, and when it said a few years earlier, they entertained him being a scientific villain first. And I was like, I wonder if that coincides with Saturn and Aquarius. And sure it did. And so, Aquarius didn't stick, but Saturn and Aries came around and started the entire, superhero.
Shebang.
Yeah,
The genre,
the
really.
genre itself.
Hmm.
So what do you think about this Superman movie and Superman as a Saturn and Aries archetype?
Yeah. So one, there's actually a piece that I've written out for the Ingress that about Superman, actually, called Superman Rising. And what I think is fascinating is, of course, it's going through its Saturn return. It's also going through its Ceres return. Um, I think the moon was in Sagittarius at the first Superman release as well, and the time does, or at least the moon doesn't change its signs throughout the day. And when the movie came out this summer, so admittedly, I'm not a Superman fan. I'm not really a superhero person. I want to also be very clear about that. But I somehow found myself at opening night watching Superman, and this is a reboot. This is a complete remake. So the Superman universe, or the DC universe, I should say, is also going through its own global world order tectonic plate shift. So James Gunn, who's the director of Guardians of the Galaxy, among others, he and Suicide Squad, he was tapped to basically re-lead this build. And so now you get to reintroduce Superman, who is looking to preach kindness, compassion, empathy. It's not leading with brutal strength. It's not trying to assert dominance. It's really trying to honor how to be a leader while also having a lot of compassion, and that kindness is actually a strength, not a weakness, which I think is a really striking message, of course, to be introducing into the collective consciousness at this moment in time in the aftermath of the United States Pluto return. And it's worth noting this movie did come out at the peak of Saturn and Neptune in Aries in their almost conjunction before they officially make that conjunction next year. But it was also the first release of the United States Uranus return. So when you think about the conflation of all these events happening and this one myth emerging, you know, what is the myth really telling us now at this junction? It's directing us into compassion, kindness, and the fact that Superman is an immigrant. This is something that was very big on the press tour. James Gunn actively coming out and saying how Superman's the original immigrant. And then he became a protector of the country. And when you think about what's happening in our country right now, and there's a whole immigration crackdown, this is resistance in the form of film. And
Mm,
it's powerful, I think.
I love that. Yeah, I was watching it the other day because I was like, I gotta watch. I have to watch it if we're gonna talk about it. Like I gotta know what this is about.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting to think about. It airs under the umbrella of the Saturn Neptune, getting as close as possible in Aries. But we have to think about its content's creation is so steeped in Saturn and Pisces and Neptune and
Mm-hmm.
Pisces, and why that
Mm-hmm.
compassionate message and that we're all one and we're here to protect each other. And, it's a global thing. And like the movie starts out with, the question of, is it Superman's job to go into another country and
Mm-hmm.
stop a conflict? Because at first I was like, where are they going with this? I'm like,
Yeah.
like playing on my mind took a very potentially like dark turn of how like Superman could be
Yeah.
portrayed as more of
Yes.
like a imperialist sort of force of like I control who in the guise of saving people, but I'm the one pulling the strings. That was not the movie at
Yeah.
all, but that's where my
No.
mind went originally because he was being challenged for his moves there.
Mm-hmm.
But it did have me thinking about that. And then also, connecting in with, the original immigrant of Superman, and also how he was misconstrued once they like,
Mm-hmm.
spoiler alerts.
Yeah.
Fast forward ahead if you haven't watched it. But when they recover the supposed transmission of his parents and what he's here to do, and he's never
Mm-hmm.
heard that before, but now all of a sudden he's tainted by some recollection of like some ill will that he was, going to harm the other people. Like there are a lot of like innuendos as
Mm-hmm.
far as, social commentary about, um, yeah, uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. I think James Gunn even said, Superman is punk. It's punk to be kind, right? It's such a Saturn and Aries term. Like it's it's a rebellion. And when you think about the impact of there are so many little boys and girls, Supergirl's coming out too, next year, whenever, but there are so many young minds in need of some sort of inspiration or direction through pop culture. It's this is how they get their feeds.
yeah.
And even if you're not in pop culture now, you were at one point in life, and that stays with you. That really builds your structure of consciousness, Saturn. So when you think about the message being imparted right now, and there are little kids going to the cinema to take this in, they're getting the message. We have to be kind. Kindness is not a problem here, actually. It's when you're not acknowledging your weaknesses and your vulnerabilities. That's the bigger issue in the room. That's when you turn into, you know, almost like an egotistical maniac who might be into tech. I don't know.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I know. I love that point because it's true. Like pop culture has a responsibility.
It does. It really
And
does.
and that's an interesting thing to think about too, because when I was going back in some of the the history here, in the late 60s, one of the things that really shocked people was, films like Bonnie and Clyde coming out, and
Hmm.
the censors were like, what, what's going on here? And then eventually like Midnight Cowboy, and the film started to test this, cultural perception of what is right for
Appropriate?
people, appropriate. I think that is a
Hmm.
great word. What is appropriate for people to see, and what, anyways. So that was
Hmm.
when the first MPAA ratings replaced the Hays Code, so that we did start having, general,
Hmm.
mature, rated R, rated X, because it let filmmakers start to push the envelope on things like sex and violence and the adult
Hmm.
themes that are so prevalent in our movies today. We're kind of used to them, but a couple Saturn and Aries returns ago, that was a big deal. Like,
Hmm.
yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think you also I love that you bring that up because, when you see it in like music, for example, like the one example that's coming to mind is the reaction to Sabrina Carpenter, for example. She came out with an album Man's Best Friend. There's a lot about the sexual forwardness of the album that really made people feel super uncomfortable. Are you catering to the male gaze? What is our relationship with sexuality? And this is the year that Anora won Best Film at the Oscars, right? A movie about a stripper who is in a fairy tale rags to riches story. So Saturn and Aries, so Saturn and Pisces all at once. But yeah, you think about, people are looking to be more expressive. And again, it's messy because we're trying to just have a direct response to passivity or a bubble or, the way things have been, which is maybe more mindful, more demure. And now it's like, I want to really, as you said, push the envelope of what I can do with my expression, and I want to be bold about it, and I'm inherently going to be sexual about it too, on some level.
Yeah, Aries is a little firecracker, and Saturn's like, hold on,
Yes.
what, what are you doing there? But and it makes me think about the late '90s period too, when you
Mm.
have, like gangster rap and like the whole sort of violent back and forth between like Tupac dying and Biggie
Hmm.
dying, and like the violence that's associated with there, and the clearly sometimes okay, I was into some gangster rap, not gonna lie. I
Yeah.
will like sing it out these days, still to this day. But I catch
Mars
myself
ruler.
now. Yeah, right. I'm like in it, and I'll catch myself now and I'll be singing along and I'm like, and I'll stop and I'll be like, what the hell am I singing? Like
What was I even singing at the baby?
if you really think about the content that is being said, like I'm like, do I want to say that? But like I have a fond place in my heart, right? Because it is the pop culture of my high school years.
Yes.
But there is something to be said about like the degradation of women and the
Hmm.
overt violence, or I'm gonna get you bleep bleep bleep,
Yes.
whatever. I'm like getting out my Ghetto Boys soundtrack. But it's interesting that it tests the bounds, and maybe we all go along with it, but even after the fact, as they like look back, I even
Hmm.
question, I don't want to say morally, because I mean maybe I
Yeah.
don't know of like, yeah, what was going on there? Why was I was attached to it because of why, and I'm clearly
Hmm.
not that person anymore. But
Hmm.
I don't know. It's funny because you think about pop culture is like a lot of people just go along with it.
Yes, yes, it's fed and you ingest it, and it's almost like I didn't even sign up for it, right? And I'm still ingesting it. I can't escape it. And so that's why, again, I think, that point about how pop culture actually does have a responsibility, but also, again, a reflection of collective sentiment. It's really mirroring back, maybe, there are appropriate places because apparently there are appropriate places to show our rage, and there are not so appropriate places to show our rage. And when we are trying to show our rage in the places that need to show the rage, we're getting, arrested, or protesters are getting knocked down, right? And so when you channel it into art, it takes on its own life form. And so you then get to see art become a statement again in a way that maybe civility doesn't allow for any kind of breach of social norms. So you get things like Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, even though, Saturn in Pisces era. You're getting the double down this year with Bad Bunny coming up on stage, and how that is reflecting this shift also of how, again, artists, celebrities, anyone in popular culture, anytime you go viral, anything, there is a message that you're communicating, and you have to choose wisely at this junction, especially to lead, to establish a new direction of authority for the collective.
100%. It makes me think about 1968 with James Brown, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That's like literally when the fist, the whole
Hmm.
fist symbol came up for Black Power and like the Black Panther movement. And that
Hmm.
was the message because it was then being fed into through popular music like James Brown. And like
Hmm.
people are out there raising their fists and dancing with James Brown, and it's interesting just to think about those time periods, and then you bring it to sort of the gangster rap era of like the late '90s, and then here we
Hmm.
have like Kendrick Lamar's,
Hmm.
essential
Moment.
protest
Yeah.
challenging, yeah, challenge to the system, because
Hmm.
essentially at the end of the day, it's always just challenges to the system. Tell me a little bit. I don't know a thing about Bad Bunny. Why is he
Why is Bad Bunny significant? So he's
why
actually
is he
one
so
of
bad?
Why is he so bad? I mean, honestly, depending on which side of the aisle you ask, he's terrible, and the other side, he is amazing. So Bad Bunny, of course, is an artist from Puerto Rico who has really been on the scene for a minute, but I think really came into a different stratosphere of success at his Saturn return with the release of his latest album. And that had come out actually during Mars retrograde in Cancer earlier this year. And so his big thing was the album was intended to be a love letter to Puerto Rico and a commentary also on sort of what's been happening in Puerto Rico. I think there's a song called Turistas where, he talks a lot about people coming to the island to be play tourists, but then forgetting about it after,
Mm.
and it really kind of, it's a really, he's been involved in the local grassroots politics movement as well. So this, I would say, was his most political, but also by virtue of it being a cultural reclamation, it becomes political in this day and age, especially
Mhm.
when there is again such a crackdown on representation in DEI. Bad Bunny comes on the scene and is very unabashedly, I'm proud to represent my heritage. I'm only going to really speak in Spanish. I'm only going to sing in Spanish. And I'm not even going to come to America. You have to come to my concert at my residency in Puerto Rico if you want to see me. And so it is huge. And of course, he just got asked to play the Super Bowl next year, or I would say Jay-Z picked him because Jay-Z does pick the Super Bowl halftime shows after 2019 with Rock Nation. So the fact that you are getting now a Latino artist or Latinx artist to headline the most watched event in American television and most likely going to be performing entirely in Spanish is so revolutionary.
Yeah.
And, it's going to piss a lot of people off. It already has pissed a lot of people off. But that is, I think, what Saturn in Aries is trying to do. And I think his residency that really took place over the summer, it was sold out. Tickets were really hard to get. And it was happening during that Jupiter Saturn square. So, it's a really interesting way to conceptualize or think about it. Jupiter and Cancer sort of being this nationalistic pride, but then also Saturn Aries like really standing your ground and standing your guns and owning that identity. And that actually being met with great, great success for him during his Saturn return. He also has Venus in Aries at 2 degrees.
Mm.
So obviously getting really
In the
activated during
mix.
this time. Yes, absolutely. He's a key player, but someone who I think is a really important cultural figure showing us the trend of celebrity and how you should start to approach your music with authenticity. If you are someone who maybe, isn't white or someone who comes from a different culture, own that, really embrace that, bring it to the forefront because that originality, that honest, genuine voice is what people are in dire need of, not so much the cookie cutter bullshit.
Yes, we're all over yeah, anybody that's into the underground has been over the cookie cutter bullshit for millennia now, but I love it.
Absolutely.
I love it. I love the contrast because you're watching the Super Bowl, which is super American. And then
Yes.
I'm like there's this one Ram commercial that keeps playing.
Oh
Do
my
you know what I'm talking
God.
about?
Yes. I'm
That
like, what
oh
am
my
I watching?
it makes me just so like it's just like if it could get any more like stereotypical what
Hmm.
maybe USA could be, it's the Ram truck and it's got the eagle's like and then the flag is flying and it's on this terrain and it's basically talking about good old boys somewhere in there and I'm like this is
Hmm.
who said this is America? Oh, what is it? The list is like not the list, but the dialogue is like what Americans want, but we know what Americans and I'm like, dude, you don't know what Americans are. So I'm thinking about commercials like that being put up
Yeah.
against about like, well, look at what's on stage. Look at what is like being pushed the boundary right now. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
man, if I watch that Ram commercial one more time, I'm gonna
I was
punch the
gonna say
TV.
it pops up so much. It's almost as jarring as when the Jesus commercial comes on, You're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm watching football on Sundays, and then all of a sudden the Jesus commercial comes on, and you're like, wow, there is a lot happening here. And then he goes back to back with the Dodge Ram. It's like, okay, I know what you're trying to communicate to
Yes,
me,
I not
but
biting, not biting. Whew.
our culture has
Anyways,
responsibility.
yeah, it does. It does. God, it's just so. All right, I'm going to segue.
We're gonna
I'm going gonna segue from that commercial here. Um,
Yes.
you know what was an interesting theme, and it kind of makes sense,
Hmm.
Aries being the first sign of the zodiac, and it has a connection with youth culture, essentially.
Hmm.
And what was
Yes.
fascinating about, the late 30s, the late 60s, the late 90s, these are all times of, teenagers coming to the surface, in the late 30s.
Yes.
This is when teenagers actually started to get an identity, out in the
Mm.
swing halls, and there was the whole, they were in culture, they were actually gaining some force where it's not just the adults or the older folks or the matrons of society, but teenagers were getting their place. And then by the time of the 60s, we had essentially the whole teenage movie. If you think about the movie movement of like the swinging 60s, and Twiggy coming
Hmm.
out, and everybody in the short skirts and the block prints, which is very fitting when I think about like the minimalism of what Aries could be. And then
Hmm.
in the late 90s, we have like Britney Spears and the boy bands that are coming up, and like a revival of teenage culture there
Hmm.
too. And so it makes me wonder, and I don't know if you've seen any threads recently of any like teens rising to the surface or anything going on in that zone.
I would say there's definitely a new wave coming up, especially when you think about like, I don't know, female pop. And you might have already seen that last year when Jupiter moved into Gemini. And I think there's a little bit of time bending because, Pluto moving into from Capricorn Aquarius, Saturn's still significant in rulership. And so from Pisces to Aries, there's a little bit more blending, and it's doubled down with the Saturn Neptune symbolism of it all, right? So everything is kind of melding into this new world order. But yeah, you saw the rise of, these sort of more messy, authentic, like Charlie XCX had Brat Summer last summer. Even though, again, it was at Saturn Pisces, you see the continuation of that this year. There's another generation coming through. But also in true Saturn return fashion, I literally saw a thing about how NSYNC is trying to come back for a reunion tour. I know
Oh, I think I
Backstreet
saw that.
Yes, Backstreet Boys is at the Sphere, Britney Spears documentary is in the process of getting made. It's directed by John M. Chu, who directed Wicked. So, you're seeing some threads connecting. Victoria Beckham has a documentary coming out soon, actually, right around the full moon in Aries, which makes me wonder if there's a Spice Girls reunion coming back into collective consciousness. Let's hope, for me personally. But you do see a different generation come through. But again, there is just an emphasis on messiness and wanting to be real about how we're feeling. And I think if you're an artist and if you're wondering like, well, how do I want to make my mark? How do I want to really get my name out there? It's really well, honesty is kind of the best policy. You don't have to think about, well, what can I should I package this way? Like it's looking for
Mhm.
raw emotion. I think we're so starved for that, especially with so much curation on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I just had oh God, Old Dirty Bastard, the Give It to Me
Yeah.
Raw. Like,
Yes.
oh, which was probably during that time period. Oh, it might have been like 95, I'm not sure, but it's close to around that time.
But it is interesting because you talked about Tupac earlier, and of course we have Diddy. We're literally recording this on the eve of Diddy's sentencing, which is a whole Saturn
Oh,
return
yeah.
situation as well. So yeah.
Yes, where they end up. Where they
Yes.
when Saturn comes around.
When Saturn comes
You were
around.
once on top and now. But speaking of Saturn coming around,
Mm.
another thing you brought to my attention was the fact that South Park is entering
Yes.
its Saturn return. Oh my goodness. And
Yes.
so, you know what's interesting though, when going back in time, there's a theme during for Saturn and Aries around animation,
Mhm.
because in 1937 or 38, there was the first ever full feature length animation of Snow White. And then even in the late 90s, that's when animation came to the fore, and all these animation shows were coming out,
Mhm.
including South Park, which, if that's not Saturn and Aries, like testing the boundaries. Oh my goodness.
If you look at their natal chart, actually, so I have a deep dive on my YouTube channel, but they are an Aries rising, I believe. They're Leo sun, Aries rising, and Sagittarius moon potentially. I know they're triple fire, and they have Saturn therefore retrograde in Aries in their first house. They also have Mars in Libra at 29 degrees conjunct Chiron in Libra in the seventh. And so I think when you frankly, I can't have asked for a better chart for a show. But I think they're so important right now because when you think about the crackdown on freedom of speech, and of course it's happening disproportionately across gender, race, because obviously Jimmy Kimmel recently got censored and he got reinstated. He got suspended, censored, suspended, reinstated. But then there's so many other people who have not gotten reinstated in their jobs for speaking out against something. So, it's really interesting that South Park really gets to push the envelope. And I wasn't a again, I wasn't a big fan of South Park before this. So very similar to Superman, like very begrudgingly, like I'm watching these things because I feel like called to watch them. I believe that South Park is sort of the last great freedom of speech stand on um broadcast TV on, even
Mm.
though they're on Comedy Central, but they are still on the air. And the things that they're saying against Trump and bringing up in their episodes this season especially are really important. And it's almost confusing as to why Trump can't sue them or why Trump won't gag them, honestly, with the stuff that they've said because it's pretty nuclear. And apparently they are abiding by the small dick rule or something, where because they are bringing up a tiny penis on the show and linking it to Trump, Trump can't sue because Trump would then have to acknowledge he has a tiny penis.
Oh my
So
God.
there is a very Saturn and Aries loophole here that is allowing them to assert their authority, be very messy, but really speak a lot of truth. And I mean, last week I think was the first episode that they've ever come out with that explicitly condemns Israel. And so,
Mm.
it's, I think, really important pop culture viewing right now because they are the harbingers of truth in this very heightened McCarthy-esque era time that we're in.
Man, I remember I remember when South Park first came out and I was in my first year of college, I think it was, and I was obsessed. Like I
Yeah.
was hooked because I was a huge Simpsons fan, but I mean, you'd never seen anything like that before. Like just the
Hmm.
things that they got away with and the crassness and the humor and then how they would bring and because they're always bringing in much like Simpsons. Simpsons have always brought in pop culture, but South Park takes
Yeah.
it to the next level. Like it's like
Hmm.
how can we degrade this? How can we turn it around with, how many innuendos or backhanded references or, it's super smart. And honestly,
Hmm.
I feel like I haven't watched an episode in probably about 25 years.
Yes.
It's been quite some time, but I love knowing that they're still out there. And it makes me wonder if that's why they're so long lasting is
Hmm.
because I mean, can we think of any other it doesn't necessarily have to be a cartoon, although cartoon is the perfect, format for these
Hmm.
types of things because it's not someone saying it, is it? It's just a cartoon character. They're not real,
Right.
right? But
Right.
is there anything else that rivals, South Park in that
And
niche,
that,
so to speak?
no, I don't think so, honestly. Nothing is coming to mind explicitly, something that is so bombastic yet long lasting. And I think that's Saturn and Aries at its highest, right? It's continuously bombastic and they've really honed in on it because at the end of the day, I think Stephen Forrest writes about this, right? Like Saturn is really where you're looking to cultivate mastery over in your chart. And so you have to be the master of mess, the master of causing a ruckus, but that is almost like coming into your own version of authority. And their Mars in Libra at 29 degrees as the chart ruler, nothing is off limits. And it's actually, they're here to subvert social norms. And that is what that they're adhering to what the chart is asking, or the chart is reflecting what they've been doing, chicken and egg, right? And so, um, it's almost like a, okay, interesting. This is how I can maybe use a fallen Mars and Saturn, both fallen Mars and Saturn
Yeah.
to my benefit is I really have to double down. And maybe it's not as pleasant, it might be cringe for some people, but I'm not really here to appease all. I'm here to really listen to what I have, like lean into what I have to say, and then really make it loud and bombastic. And of course, they're triple fire. So,
Of course, you get, yeah. Well, that's a great point just about planets in detriment is that, they have their issues, but one of their superpowers, I guess maybe pun intended, since we're talking about one of their superpowers is to go against the grain, is to do things differently or to innovate because
Mhm.
planets in their own domicile are going to do that archetype and they're going to do it, well within the constraints of the archetype itself, or maybe within the cultural constraints of what that archetype looks like. And
Mhm.
so having those detriment placements, picking off of one another, I love it. It is subversive and it
Mhm.
will poke the bear, so to speak. And
Mhm.
it makes me think of, because of course I was like, oh, well, what was going on? Because I wondered if like, Matt Stone, Trey Parker. Do I
Yes,
get, yes.
yes,
I wondered if they had started it during their Saturn return, but actually it was like right before because they both have Saturn in Taurus
yes.
natally. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. Maybe that contributes to their long lasting
Hmm.
nature of the project itself. But the project entity is steeped in this fire trines that are, Saturn and Aries. And you think about fall, that's the important thing we have to always remember about fall, where detriment, maybe that Mars is,
Hmm.
it'll exile itself, it'll back itself away, it'll sit on the fringe. But when it comes to fall, it's this idea that it's like, yeah, we're going to do the thing, then we're going to do the thing, and then we're going to trip over ourselves, or we're going to fall in this divot, but we're going to get right back
Hmm.
up,
Hmm.
because how many times has South Park been contested or like, but it gets right back up. And I think that's like the
Yes.
thing about fall planets that people might not realize is that if they have resiliency to them, it's like uh God, I had a good analogy, but it's leaving me. I was gonna say a jack in the box, but like it's or like a whack-a-mole. You
Mhm.
hit it, it
Yes,
goes down, and
absolutely.
it just pops right back up. It's like herpes. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. I mean, as someone who's nursing a cold sore from the Mars Pluto, yes, herpes, here we go.
It just comes back.
Yes, absolutely. But I think it's this particular season, the reason why it even caught my attention was because it had come on the heels of the whole Paramount lawsuit settlement. There is a lot about Trump and, how much money that was being thrown. Like there's a fight against the media, right? In at this current moment. And so to have South Park reemerge and have the first episode bang, I think this was at the end of July. It was hitting the nodal I think it was the nodal, yeah, it was the nodal opposition. And so, you kind of have this moment of, okay, we're getting back to our roots, maybe, and
Mm-hmm.
really like almost relocking and loading for the second go around. It's a 10 episode limited edition, it's bi-weekly, and it's going to end this December. But, you know, again, when you think about the context of media conglomeration, right? Everything is kind of it's kind of a monopoly these days. And so you don't really know where your information is getting. People are trusting more independent sources of media, which is also very Saturn and Aries, the downfall of these big media corporations and maybe more niche individual
Mm-hmm.
type of stuff that social media, can help promote. But that's why I thought it was just really fascinating because they've kind of emerged out of that whole mess and really took a hard swing at Trump right out of the gate and has not let up since. And I was actually, funnily enough, I had come into Charlie Kirk awareness watching South Park because I wasn't necessarily as familiar with his game right before, but watching South Park, it made me then look up Charlie Kirk because there was a whole episode dedicated to him. And obviously, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, Comedy Central, I think, opted to take the episode off air, which is very interesting because Charlie Kirk actually said he loved the episode based on what his close friends were saying. So again, South Park is a really important and has responsibility right now, even though they might not necessarily seem, or they've been always on the exile, the outskirts, the Mars and Libra, they are very much dead center as part of this rebuild right now and this fight or resistance against free
Mm,
speech.
yes.
Hmm.
So we are seeing that thread essentially when I was talking about earlier, new ratings coming up and
Yeah.
and even like in the 30s it was big band and swing was so was getting so big and they finally got into like Carnegie Hall to be taken seriously here because these are
Hmm.
all forms of free speech that sit on the fringe that are trying to get in to be like I am here and I am maybe contentious or I am something that you're not used to or it's different from the norm. But we all have a right to be here and you brought up Jimmy Kimmel, right? uh
Yes.
it
Also
was a
going through
good
his Saturn
example.
return.
Hmm.
At this moment. Saturn and Aries specifically, because we're obviously in Saturn and Pisces, but
Which makes
yes.
me think, once again, coming back to the fall, the whack-a-mole, right? He tried to
Yes.
whack him down, but no, he represented something enough to be maybe that Superman figure. Like he's not
Hmm.
Superman, but
Hmm.
he's acting as a figurehead
Hmm.
of some sort that brings the topic to the forefront whether or not he's trying to or not, and this
Hmm.
is where examples are made because it's all you I think about Aries is like the beauty of Aries and like taking responsibility in an Aries fashion is to lead by example.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so I feel like inadvertently he is being that, or
Hmm.
like how he came back and he shared his whole did I watch it? I
Monologue.
can't remember the
Yeah,
monologue. I'm
I
like,
definitely watched it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I haven't watched Jimmy Kimmel in so long, and there I was watching his return. So, Trump did that, I guess.
yeah, well, it's got to maybe it'll boost some ratings, Late night's been dead for a long time, like maybe.
Absolutely. And you know what? This was genuinely a question that I had posed to Camille Michelle Gray when we were talking about it, who's another astrologer. Like, here's the thing. A lot of things can be happening at the same time. We are in these Uranus and Gemini times. And so the idea that on the one hand, yes, freedom of speech is on the line here, but on the other hand, Trump saying like, well, late night media hasn't been relevant in so long, and he's using that as an excuse when he was firing Colbert, right,
Yes.
essentially. And but when you really think about it, like I haven't watched a late night show in so long. It's more of like a symbol from the past rather than, and it's like a checklist thing you have to do on the press tour. But really what gets all the views and what gets you your popularity is these mini red carpet little segments or little podcast shows that, you clip and it goes viral, right? And like it's a completely different landscape now.
Which is fascinating too, because one of the things I was noticing about like in the late 90s was the first time we had a clip go viral, the first time we had
Mm,
web, um,
content.
artifacts essentially go, like break the internet, so to speak. Like one, I don't know,
Yeah.
you might be too young to remember this, but there was this thing called the dancing baby.
Yes,
And
oh
it was
yes.
that dancing baby was everywhere. I remember it was even on like Ally McBeal, like that show. They had, the dancing baby would come out and
Yes.
like that was a huge thing. And like the like Star Wars trailer like broke the internet, because it was
Hmm.
the first time things were going viral in a way that there was this new media being accessed on the internet. So it's interesting to see what you're saying because it is, late night's been around for decades upon decades. We're talking, going
Hmm.
back to Johnny Carson's and before.
Yep.
And it's almost it's almost like the dying form that it has to exist just so that they can get the things that are actually popular, which are the web clips, are the little snippets that end up
Hmm.
on YouTube or in podcasts.
Hmm.
And so we'll see where that goes. I mean, I
Yeah.
wonder, I mean, in your eyes, where do you have any predictions of how like Saturn and Neptune and Aries, especially the
Hmm.
conjunction coming up in February, might influence pop culture or redefine it in some way?
Hmm.
Or do you see any trends kind of forming or something you think?
Yeah. So one, I think it's fascinating that at like right around the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, we actually get the Wuthering Heights re-release or remake essentially. And so there's a lot of controversy around that movie that I think is also really emblematic of the times we're in. The movie is currently being remade. It's one directed by a woman. So,
Hmm.
that's great, right? That's a very Saturn and Aries thing. Because there's not enough women in film fundamentally. But then you have, Margot Robbie, you have Jacob Elordi, you have two white leads, and, realistically, if you've read the book, you know that Heathcliff isn't necessarily like, why is he being exiled? It's because he's not like white, And so it's interesting to see that come on screen. And so when you think about a true type of, you know, not to say a civil war, because we are in these times, you're also going to get maybe art that feels like very divisive as people still try to hold on to their images from the past when
Mm.
really the public is clamoring again for a more honest representation of where we are. And so I think you're going to see still next year some tension between that, the idea of, all right, do we do a reboot or do we go into something original? Do we honor where we stand or do we want to idolize the past? Like you're going to still see that tension a little bit. Um, Maybe honestly up until the nodes switch into Leo and Aquarius, right? Because that's really when I think the US Pluto return really comes into full effect because we're still in the aftermath of it, as Saturn and Neptune is settling. So I would imagine that there being sort of, again, the bifurcation of maybe, there's like overt type of propaganda coming out to hold on to the past, but then also a lot of breakthroughs and firsts. And so I think watching the Oscars next year will actually be a really interesting thermal point at understanding exactly where culture is, because you're undoubtedly going to have Sinners, which was a huge movie this year that came out in not Venus retrograde, but it came out in March, right before the Venus retrograde, I think. And it's obviously in sort of that concoction just before Neptune moving into Aries. Um, but the Oscars next year are going to be happening around like Feb, right? As it always is, or early March. And so you'd really get to see sort of again how are people thinking? The body has been the most diverse body it's ever had, representation wise. So how does that actually reflect? You might have a lot of first time winners also coming to the stage, right? So there is sort of this clearing of path for the new generation to come
Mm.
in, but also we want new perspectives at the table in more earnestness. So I would imagine actually Sinners doing solid at the Oscars next year, which would be a huge moment um for film, for representation, especially again in the cultural climate that we're in.
I think you hit the nail on the head because that seems like the theme within all these periods that we've been talking about here
Hmm.
today is that there is this pivot point that happens. And with pivot points, especially with Saturn,
Hmm.
you gotta grasp on and you're gonna hold on to this is what I know. And I that is it's the turning point. So it makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense. And I love that you brought up the change of the nodes too, because it does feel like by the time the south node rolls around to Leo, this could be a dropping out of old archetypes of pop culture or
Hmm.
figures people have looked to for many years as the pop royalty or music royalty, and then these new unique characters or
Hmm.
groups of people or troops are going to come to the forefront, and we're going to see this change to what, and maybe the fringe actually becomes what it, and that's always the case if you look at any sort of pop culture. Not
Hmm.
always, but a lot of the times, by the time it hits the pop, it was fringe how many years before that. So it makes me
Absolutely.
wonder what all these certain underground movements, whether they're current in this day and age or they're underground movements that were decades ago, that are going to come to the
Hmm.
forefront and then become part of pop culture and
Hmm.
mainstream attention once all these shifts take place. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And what I wanted to say is, there is a lot about the death of celebrity culture out there in the media. And
mm,
my thing is always, I'm not trying to be annoying by correcting, but I think it's not the death of celeb culture because celeb culture persists through time. It's the death of our relationship to this chapter of celebrity. Because I think when, you know, the election, not to, well, this conversation's, political, not political, right? Pop culture. With the election last year, you had so many celebrity endorsements, right? And you think again of celebrities as like authority figures because they have platforms and power and money, but it did not work. There's no influence. Where is the influence? there is no influence. The power has been redistributed, and
Mm-hmm.
so when you think about Saturn and Aries, it's a different kind of relationship of consumption that we have with pop culture. It's not, again, idolization, overtness to the point of passivity, and I can't do anything. It's okay, well, I want to be inspired by my leaders, and I want someone who's more active because it's reflecting me as someone that's more active as well. So, it's again a different kind of relationship, one that we're not looking for instruction from, but one that we're maybe looking for to inspire a different kind of agency rather than consumption dependency, moving out of Pluto Capricorn into Aquarius, because everything was marketed to sell, rather than actually like let's build community. But what does that even mean? So there is a lot, again, about reclaiming power back to the people rather than thinking that celebrities only have the power in the room to affect the change, as you can kind of see with, efforts with the flotillas and things like that. You've had
Yeah.
some celebrities on board, or Greta Thunberg, she might not consider herself a celebrity, but she's basically a celebrity activist. And, how you use your platform again. So people are, again, clamoring for that, which means it's an evolution of celebrity culture. It's not a
Yeah.
death of it. Mhm.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely on point with that. I know we're always there's always going to be some figure or face or ideal or image that rises to the crop that the top the crop
The crop
rises to the crop rises to the top
rises through the crop to the top.
through the crop to the top, and people are going to be looking at it. And so the question is, who are we going to be looking at? And I love some of the
Mhm.
examples that you brought up here. So oh my gosh, Tasha, I feel like we did such a wonderful treatment of I mean, we could talk for hours about the potential of what could be in pop culture, or things from the past, or things we see now, or just
Mhm.
reminisce down memory lane, as my Cancer self loves to do.
Yes.
But we will put a pin in it for now, and hopefully Tasha will be back on another program on another day. But until then, where can people find you? What do you got going on?
Fabulous. Yeah. So I have a couple of things coming out publication wise, about pop culture, of course. So as I said earlier, I've got Superman, a little article on Superman, and then I have a collaborative piece with Emily Ann, I think, on Katy Perry and Marie Antoinette that should be coming out as well. But yeah, otherwise you can find me on social media, YouTube and Instagram, most actively at the Pop Astrologist. I have a weekly-ish pop culture astrology recap, kind of denoting the events of the week, because I think there's so much, horoscope and telling the future and predicting, and not to say that all astrologers do that, but I deeply craved a recap weekly thing, the way that there's pop culture recaps, but I wanted one done specifically for astrology. So it's called Signs and Headlines, and it comes out every Sunday, for your
Hmm.
coffee. But I also do a lot of pop culture deep dives. So yeah, a lot of reclaiming pop culture for the good, as I would say.
Oh, I love it. All right. Well, go check Tasha out there at the Pop Astrologist. And especially if you like pop culture, I mean, you're always popping into my feed with some content, and I'm like, oh, that's happening. And that's happening. And even if we're not out there as astrologers saying like, look at this chart, look at that chart, a lot of times when things are happening in the zeitgeist, we're going to go look at the chart. And so a lot of times you pop it up and I was like,
Absolutely.
oh yeah, I was just looking at that.
Yeah.
Oh
The
yeah,
way
that's it.
the way I think about it is, I would like to be an entertainment source for other astrologers, because if I'm looking at something, as you said, I'm immediately going to the chart. I want to hear what other people have to say about certain things. This is what I have to say about it. What are you saying about it? And again, how am I creating my own water cooler moment when there is no water cooler structure? Right now with remote work, not remote work, right? We've completely shifted into a different landscape post that Jupiter Saturn, post Mars Saturn, post like literally post 2020, right? And so how are we redefining our relationship with each other? Pop culture is still a constant, and that can be used as a vessel to bridge the divide, hopefully.
So I just see you on like a green screen that the background is literally a water cooler, and you're there, and then maybe you have like maybe you have guests, and then there's like another someone else comes in the green screen, you're just standing around
Yeah,
the water cooler and you're
we're
like
just like
talking about the stuff. That's funny.
it's
Uh
archaic now. Like what happened to
it-
that water
what
cooler?
is that? Yeah, no, we're all gonna We
The
all
water
have our
bearer.
Stanley Cups or,
Oh my God, yes, the
into
water bearer has moved into the mini water
the
bearer.
Stanley Cup. Yeah, it's funny. I do not have one. My partner has one, but I learned when he got one, I learned about it. I was like, what's this? Everybody has these? What is this? Like
It's a
a
whole
$40
thing.
water thing? Yeah, it's a whole thing.
The
So I
whole
guess it's
thing.
even the water's pop culture these days, even the
There we
water.
go. There we go. Them and the
So
Labubus.
I don't get me started on Labubu.
Which was also a very similar cyclical thing with Saturn and Aries because of the Beanie Babies. So Beanie
No, the
Babies came
Beanie
out
Babies. Yes. Oh my God.
Saturn and Aries. Now we get Saturn and Aries and Labubus.
Now I would wonder if I'd be curious to see when the troll doll came out because I know troll dolls were around in the 70s, I think.
Oh my God.
Because that's funny. All right, let me just look real quick.
When did the troll dolls come a lot online? You know what? I didn't even think about that. I'd only thought about the Beanie Babies, but that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, well, they came out originally in 1959 and then they launched in the US in 1963, but they quickly became one of the biggest toy fads in America through the mid 60s. So they didn't quite make it. They were in the Saturn and Aquarius zone, which makes sense because
Yes.
they look so crazy with their hair. But yeah. Yeah, no, I was thinking about the other day. I'm like, what's up with these Labubus? Who wants to carry a little doll on their? Why do people do such weird things? This is the thoughts that are going into my head. But
Yeah, it's
that's my own
interesting.
Saturn talking, you know?
No, that makes, I mean, it makes sense because also when you think about luxury brands, for example, they are trying to figure out how to meet a different kind of demand from people, in the sense that there's not as maybe much money to spend from a certain demographic anymore. And so how do you make certain things accessible? And how do people still become part of a trend? It's still Aquarian, right? The idea that people still want to find community and a sense of belonging. And so instead of status symbols, it's maybe a more accessible thing that carries a spectrum of accessibility. So you can partake in the conversation by having a cheaper item. You can also obviously be like a Naomi Osaka and have custom bling labubus that you bring to every tennis match, right? But it is still connecting you to something bigger than yourself at a more affordable price point in, again, this day and age where income inequality and wealth inequality is really at its all-time high, it seems like.
Whew. Well, that is another topic for another time because that's a whole other can of worms to open. But
This
all right.
I was gonna say this is when I tell you I'm in college. I for one of my college admissions essays, I it's so funny how the chart comes alive, but I remember writing about Greek tragedies and how Bollywood movies should actually be considered as important or honored in the same way we honor Greek tragedies rather than ridicule because of the emotional catharsis that a Bollywood movie does offer you from the highs to the lows, regardless of the ludicrousness. So I love
Oh my
maybe
goodness.
pulling additional meaning from pop culture. Maybe it's superfluous, but I don't know. There's always depth to mind and everything. And, I'm a Scorpio rising, so I'd like to investigate.
Well, I'm gonna investigate that because I literally had a dream 2 nights ago about a Bollywood film. So, but that's
Ooh.
something else. We'll talk about it after show. So, all right. Well, okay. So where can you find me? You can find me over at energeticprinciples.com. You can find me at tarotofher.com because we are about to relaunch our next Kickstarter for this Tarot of Her second edition with an expansion pack. So you're going to want to check that out. And yeah, if you like what you heard here today, click the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, leave a comment below. Do you have anything to share about pop culture, Saturn and Aries, some of the things that we talked about here today? We'd love to hear it. And if you're watching or sorry, listening to this in podcast form, leave a review wherever you listen because it helps my podcast be more searchable and up in the ranks of all the podcasts that are out there in the world. You gotta help a girl out. So, yeah, well, let me make sure I have no more notes because, like a good Saturn in Virgo, I have notes. Oh,
Absolutely.
share with a friend. That's my last note. Sharing is caring. Let them know, especially if you have a friend that's into pop culture or into all the things that are happening, they're going to want to listen to this program. So, Tasha, thank you so much for joining me on the program today. It was a delight to talk to you.
Likewise, thank you for having me and hope I'm back soon.
Absolutely. You will be. All right, everyone, take care out there. Enjoy your pop culture. Get your popcorn because it's going to be a ride with Saturn and Aries. So take care. And as always, may the stars be with you.